There's literally millions of Americans who still believe the myth, and it is a myth, that Ford's vehicles are manufactured in the US, or that even half of the parts in their cars come from US suppliers. Well, that's not true. And in fact, now Ford and Toyota are fighting the United States government to change the rules of the Inflation Reduction Act so that they don't have to make the parts in the US. Because frankly, they don't want to do that. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the channel. I'm the Electric Viking. Great to see you. Welcome to all the new subscribers and welcome back everyone else. Thank you for tuning in. And thank you for supporting us either on Patreon or as a member of the channel. I'll put links in the description below to Patreon page and our YouTube membership. Ford and Toyota are opposing their suppliers over the EV tax credit. What does that mean? Well, they're calling on the US government to rethink the IRA. Well, they're saying, don't rethink it, change it now for us because, well, we don't want to source products for our electric cars in the United States. Now, I'm curious to know why Ford, you would think, right, Ford manufactures their vehicles in the US. But the reality is, Cars.com showed their extensive research, which proved that Ford doesn't make any cars that are really all that American at all. In fact, the 5 most American-made cars are all Teslas, except for one, which bizarrely was a Lincoln, which is produced in minuscule numbers. However, of the top 10 most American-made cars, Ford doesn't have any except for that Lincoln. And the truth is, the majority of parts going into Ford and Toyota vehicles, which even are produced in the US, they're not actually from US suppliers. They're from places like Europe and China. But of course, no one wants to know about that. Ford wants to keep that quiet, so does Toyota. As automakers call on the US government to rethink a plan to limit tax credits for EVs, they're facing opposition from an unexpected source, their own suppliers. Car plants such as Ford Motor Company and Toyota say the government should loosen the terms of the $430 billion Inflation Reduction Act, for them specifically, to allow manufacturers to source electric vehicle components from more places, for example, from China or India or Mexico or wherever else they can get them for the cheapest price. Under this recently passed legislation, consumer tax credits the auto industry says are critical to widespread adoption and American manufacturing wouldn't be allowed for EVs whose batteries contain material from a so-called foreign entity of concern beginning in 2024. I mean, clearly 2 years is not enough for Ford to get their act together or for Toyota to get their act together. I mean, Toyota would need about 200 years, so that, I'm not really talking about them in this video all that much because, frankly, Ford is so far ahead of them. But that said, I am surprised to hear Ford fighting this. The automaker's stance clashes with that of US mining companies supplying raw materials to the industry, who say the act is right to push manufacturers toward domestic producers. In other words, mining companies, they're saying, hey, Ford, Toyota, hey, we can supply you. No, listen, we'll supply you, don't worry. And same thing, miners in Canada, they're saying, we'll supply you. Ford and Toyota, no, can't hear you. US government, this isn't fair. We need to get our cheap stuff from China. This isn't fair. That's what they're doing. This is exactly what they're doing. They want the subsidies, but they want to get cheap bargain parts from wherever the hell they can get them. Is this reasonable? Really? Is it? What do you think? This rift has spilled out into the open as the Internal Revenue Service solicited public input on the EV tax credit provisions in the new law, and it underscores the divergent agendas of companies across the supply chain on a hotly debated topic. EV adoption has surged in recent years, in part because of consumer incentives that bring down sticker prices, still running well above those of gas-fueled models. Now, that's what the mainstream media is saying. That's what Ford's claiming. That's what Toyota claims. What happened when Tesla's vehicles didn't qualify for the EV incentives? Did they sell 100% more? They did. Their sales went up 100%, more than 100% within that period of time when they didn't qualify versus when they did. And this is crazy. It proves one thing categorically. The demand is there for EVs whether there's subsidies or not. But the key issue here, is American manufacturing. Millions of job losses. And not only that, but the economic stability needed for the global world. I mean, realistically, there's a lot of people fighting me on this and I can't understand it. Do you really think it's not worth making this happen? I mean, what do you think the alternative is? The alternative is that China will own 90% of the global automotive industry, including battery manufacturing. 90%. Look at where batteries are made now. 85% of the world's batteries are made in China. That is the very definition of the word monopoly. Without the IRA coming in, that's what would continue to happen. The automotive industry in North America would have been completely lost. And I said this many times before the IRA was even a thing, before I'd even heard of it. So this is absolutely needed. And the fact that Ford and Toyota are saying, you know what, we don't care about that. We only care about our instant profits is, to me, disappointing. In comments to the IRS released last Thursday, Ford urged the US to exempt domestic suppliers from the foreign entity restrictions regardless of ownership and to allow most non-US companies as long as 50% or less of their ownership doesn't meet the foreign entity of concern definition. An overly expansive interpretation of this provision risks undermining the law's objectives by making the vehicle credits largely unavailable, the company said. Ford said the industry needs flexibility so that unintended traces of critical minerals from foreign entities of concern don't disqualify consumers from getting a tax credit. Similarly, the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, which lobbies for car makers including Ford, urged the IRS to fully contemplate the complexity and structure of the battery supply chain when finalizing rules. The group called for flexible guidance. Now, this is a bit ironic, you have to say, when the media said to Ford only a few days ago, will your vehicles qualify for the new IRA incentives? And Ford were like, yeah, they will, no problems, they're all sorted. And then they do this on the side, and they're kind of keeping this quiet. They're not really publicizing this to the media. This argument they're having with the US government, this, what would you call it, lobbying. And the thing is, what I'm concerned about is the power that Ford have. I mean, they're part of course, the UAW, the biggest union in North America, which has a direct influence on the Biden administration. It's a fact. So I'm concerned that Ford has too much power here to change this. And Ford, what do they care about? Do they care about the importance of manufacturing in the US, or do they care about simply making the most profit? Well, they're a car company. I'm pretty convinced they only care about making profit. Toyota, meanwhile, said guidelines on manufacturing and sourcing should be spelled out, and that Japan should be explicitly included among the sources eligible for tax credits. In fact, Toyota made some very big threats to the US government, saying it would cause economic devastation to the US by somehow making sure that thousands and thousands of jobs would be lost and that the Japanese people would stop investing in the US, period. I mean, that was just some of their threats that they made to the US government. I think Toyota's just lost their minds completely here. America's allies, most notably Japan, are at the core of America's strategy to address vulnerabilities in critical supply chains, the company said in a letter Friday to the US government. And in that same letter, bizarrely, you can see that Toyota is very much aware that they don't have a free trade agreement with the US. So the US gets no benefits, right, of trading with Japan, but Japan wants the benefits of trading with the US. I can't understand how they can't see the hypocrisy in that. To me, that's really strange. Domestic producers of the critical materials needed to power EVs, like nickel, lithium, and copper, want a stricter interpretation of where automakers can buy from, since compelling companies to purchase US-produced materials and minerals supports the domestic supply chain. President Joe Biden has argued that the US needs to bolster its domestic production and supply chains because much of the key materials, in fact, pretty much all of them, for EVs and the energy transition are dominated by China. The US cannot afford to outsource extraction and processing of hard rock minerals to foreign rivals, the National Mining Association trade group said in its comments on the law. China is home to more than 80% battery manufacturing capacity, and that dominance is built upon unrivaled control of mineral supply chains. The industry has argued that this is why the language was explicitly written into the IRA. All raw materials should be made within US borders. Doing so would help domestic mining companies secure critical financing to grow their projects and become viable commercial scale companies to supply automakers. That's my key point. If we don't support those companies, well, it won't happen. I think Ford and Toyota, of course, are just completely missing the point here. These incentives are not really even for Ford. They're for those companies. They're for the US population as a whole. They're for stability, economic stability. By expanding the definition of domestic material, US mining companies argue it would allow loopholes for car companies to source key parts that have, say, nickel from Russia, rare earths from China, etc., etc. To allow non-US raw material to be included would create outcomes that were clearly not intended by Congress, according to comments from Mining Minnesota, which represents companies in the state. Now, you know what I think on this. What I want to know is, what do you think? I know a lot of you don't agree with me on this. That's okay. It's fine to have a different opinion. But let me know why you don't agree. But as always, thank you for watching. Have a great day, and I'll see you again on the next video. Bye-bye.